instance of a Power Pivot, so to speak. So if I go in here to data, and you can see here from other sources, you go choose from analysis services. And I'm going to put in the SQL Server, because this does require the SQL Server analysis services to be running in tabular mode. So you'll notice here we've got this tabular example. I can pull the model, which might go across general ledger and sales. In this case, I can just grab just one, what's called a perspective, which is just the GL part of the equation. And I'll hit next and hit finish. Okay. And I'll just drop this pivot reports fine. Okay. So the difference between this and what I just showed you a minute ago is when we refreshed the data a minute ago, if I had 3 years of data and let's say 1 million rows being pulled into my spreadsheet, it is in memory, it's compressing that data behind the scenes of the spreadsheet, but you're still storing that data within the Excel document. With this, I'm actually not storing any of the data, only just the summarized data in the pivot table. So it's every time I add something in my pivot table, it's going back to the server and say, okay, just return back what I've asked for. So in this case, if I go to the right here and we look at maybe our count hierarchy, you can also do hierarchy, so I'll drag that into my rows. And we'll go over here and select, let's see, maybe our sums here. So let's look at maybe our year-to-date amount versus our budget. So I'll look at actual amount year-to-date, and I'll compare that to my budget amount year-to-date. Okay, and you'll notice here I've dragged in some account hierarchy into my rows and some values. My pivot table is blank, right? And the reason for that is that, like an example of our Power Pivot model for General Ledger is we've got different calendars, and based on the different calendars, if you are a fiscal calendar or you have 5 different fiscal calendars inside of your organization, and then you also want to analyze maybe purely based on a calendar basis, we can provide that flexibility. So what I need to do here is I need to go ahead and add from our calendar my year. So I'll go down here and say, let's pick our year and our period number. Oh, I actually drag those into the rows, and I can actually see data. What I want to do, give that a second, is actually make those slicers instead. So I'm going to go ahead and remove those fields again. And while that's selected, I'll just go back to Insert, and I'll choose Insert a Slicer. So here we'll grab our year and our period number. Okay. So now we can go in here, and once we pick a year, like let's say look at like 2011 or maybe 2010, you'll see we actually now have data. And because we've grabbed year to date, right, we can go in and pick maybe just period 2, and that'll calculate, you know, year to date through period 2, actual in my budget. And the hierarchy, you'll notice it's kind of has a traditional account hierarchy. So we're starting at the company level. We drill within the company down to a business unit. Within the business unit, we can drill down to the object account. The nice thing is, if I click on one of these, I can right-click on a value and hit Show Details. And this will actually show you all the granular details on the general ledger or balances that make up what you see there. So if you had, you know, different invoice numbers you want to explore, different address numbers, all of that's available there with that Show Details. Okay. We also, again, as I mentioned, this has different calendars. So if you want to dynamically change the calendars that this is rolling up, we have a calendar filter. So calendar description. Okay. And this is something that, I keep doing that. Sorry, I want that to be a slicer instead. Okay, so I'll grab this calendar description. Okay. And so now we've got this, if you want this calculating year to date based on calendar, right, you can choose calendar. But maybe if your fiscal date pattern inside JD Edwards, like you want to actually see this dynamically calculate based on date pattern F, right? We can change that, and you'll actually see the periods would be dynamically changing. So it's not just period 1 being, it could be a January 1 pay, and for one calendar, and period 1 could be, July for another. So this is how you can dynamically manage those various calendars within not having to create separate models. So we've kind of added that into the modeling of what we're doing. So this is how, again, we connected. Now, as I'm changing things here, and I want to add to this, so maybe I want to go in here and see, based on some business unit codes, right? Or maybe we'll add a, let's go ahead and add a business unit code 1. Now, these are part of our process for each client is to customize these descriptions. So if business unit code 1 is region, then we, as part of our setup and installation, we tailor that so your CAT codes are labeled based on, if you have it, updated in your data dictionary, we can actually use that as our guide. Otherwise, we can go in and just tell us what your CAT code namings are, and we update the views and the content on top of your JD data as well as the models here. So that's the going against the tabular. And so when I dragged that into the canvas, it basically reconnected to that server-based instance and brought back the data. So this is not storing. So the difference is I could save this file and it would be tiny in size. It might be kilobytes. Whereas if I actually had to pull this back in behind the Power Pivot model of my spreadsheet, it might be tens of megabytes in size. Okay. So this is just a much more if you're going to use Power Pivot on the desktop, you most likely are going to have to get to using 64-bit of Office. But if you're using Tabular like this, you can get a lot more throughput